Welcome. These will be my thoughts on Star Wars Vision Season 3, Episode 1, The Duel, Payback. The episode is rated TV PG, so will this video be. There will be spoilers for the episode and perhaps everything Star Wars leading up to it. Nothing after it, haven't watched past it. And yeah, as usual, absolutely love this episode. It's true of every episode of Vision so far. And honestly, the majority of Star Wars in general, including Disney Star Wars. So, this is probably going to be mostly gushing. Going to try to fit in some jokes and analysis as well, but holy crap, like, sometimes I find myself wondering why I don't watch more anime than I do. Yeah. Okay, so it's what we have here are multiple lightsaber wielding force users first fighting in this like gambling hall. That's already cool. Then, because the R5 unit presses the obviously should have been marked better screw everything up button, it's because it's on an ATST. I know, apparently you're supposed to pronounce it ATST. Oh wait, crap! Holy crap! Obviously, it's an AT-AT, not an ATST. Wow, I have not talked. Well, I guess it hasn't been that long since I last talked Star Wars. Whatever. But yeah, it's an AT-AT, and it starts like leaning to the side, so they're like standing off on and still fighting each other, and ends up upside down, and they're standing on the feet, and then the feet move a little bit. Like, holy crap. Just, I love how extra some anime gets. Like, they didn't have to go this hard, but they did, and I appreciate it. Another big thing, so yeah, fairly early on, it's this thing of like, you really are the Sith who hunts Siths. And is the plural form of that? Does it have an S? I forget. And we see the crystals from the saber, and she's like, oh, you want this, do you? And then later, there's there's a little break and time to recover. And so they they give her some more lightsabers. So she ends up with, like, I don't know, 10 for a hand. And then it's still, like, basically an even match. Like, the Grand Master is that freaking good. Like, holy crap. Anyway, so I guess I'll let's see. I think, okay, so most of what the rest of I have to say is going to be scene by scene, but let's start. Well, I guess, yeah, whatever. That's what I'm going with. Before that, I really appreciated the fact that they do have some, like, it can feel like it's just like the episode basically, two segments with nonstop action and a little bit of breathing room, in between, yeah, before, in the middle, and then at the end. But there is actual, mythology and philosophy there. And let's see, I love the way that the black and white contrasts so beautifully against the color of lightsabers, explosions, blaster fire, stuff like that. Yeah, I think everything else is scene by scene. Yeah, um, they do a really great job setting, like creating atmosphere for the gambling hole. And yeah, the fact that I love that it's like when the Ronin arrives to take out Anisan, yeah, it is like, oh wow, this is a really cool concept. And then the Grandmaster also shows up, like holy crap. But yeah, like you really get a sense of this dingy, like the gambling hall. It feels like a not too distant, not too far away, you know, same galaxy cousin of the Mos Eisley Cantina. And yeah, the fact that yeah, everyone's tracking everyone, I guess. So yeah, Ronan arrives using the R5 to such a clever. They're so obsessed with the money that they might lose here that yeah, they send out this former. Let's see. Yeah, the little bit of PTSD flashback was also very effective. But yeah, so he arrives and they have the fight. The fight starts, and the yeah, I appreciated little details like the way that every so often it will cut to R5 and the Wookiee, and like the various people working there trying to chase down R5. And yeah, so cool when the Grand Master arrives, the member of the Crusaders. And I kind of love the fact that, I'm not the first person to note that unmaskings are significant across a lot of Star Wars media. So yeah, when he takes off the thing covering his face, we expect to see the lips move, and then when they don't, that's like because he's essentially wearing multiple masks, you might say, or his mask is permanent. His face is a mask, metaphorically speaking, and yeah, the thing about, you might not recognize this form, but you'll recognize this Jedi's strength. And the glitch effect they have going on him and the way that he does move, like, even for a Jedi, superhumanly fast. Like, holy crap. And I think that pretty much gets us to so yeah, he attacks and ultimately, the Ronin is not killed. And so the Grandmaster, says make sure he can't leave, and so he's recovering in a Bacta hot spring, which, like, I will admit, I basically only know, I am aware that in holy crap, can I seriously not remember? Okay, this will not stand. Give me a few seconds. We are talking about Empire Strikes Back. That's it. In Empire Strikes Back, the thing that Luke heals inside of is referred to as a Bacta tank. I'm not sure they say it in the movie, but I've heard or read it somewhere that that's a Bacta tank, which is slightly confusing because Bacta tank is also what they call healing items in some of the Star Wars games, such as some of the ones featuring Kyle Katarn, for example. And it's like, that's not big enough though. That's like a handheld little thing. But yeah, obviously, they're saying, oh, this is a healing item, just like what Luke used. But yeah, the idea that there's a back to hot spring, I have no idea how closely that, if that's like changing something about canon, or if that is the idea that the back to tank fluid in Empire Strikes Back comes from a back to hot spring, and being in a back to hot spring is like more natural, more healing. If you haven't already, Kaylin Conrad just did a fantastic video about online psychics, and it's glorious. Yes. Yeah, and so Ronan's recovering, and Anisan explains um, the thing about, well, it's impossible to leave. That's why I didn't leave. But we do have a plan. And like Ronan doesn't take very long to say, you want me to be bait. Right. I guess I should also say I just love the idea of like a Sith, actually being like the muscle at this casino, and she puts on the full show. Is like, a droid, huh? Doesn't matter. I'm gonna cut you no matter what you are, and just, yeah. So it is essentially Ronan versus Ronan, it is that thing. It's a fascinating theme. What becomes of those whose lives were defined by the violence they were inflicting upon others, when that is no longer the status quo, when that's not deemed acceptable anymore, or perhaps just not profitable. I don't know if that's the right term, but it's not really working as in the initial way. And yeah, there are a number of people who, if they are used to dealing with violence, yeah, they will, for example, become like a bouncer, or maybe work mercenary or something. So yeah, I mean, it is essentially, we are looking at three lightsaber wielding force users, none of whom are really in the original, like, they are not in the, what's the term, their situation has changed. The two former Siths, one of whom hunts Siths, and then this machine that considers itself a Jedi, and it brings up, like, is it programming when we think of, like, many of us, like, we define ourselves by, well, I'm the one that does this, and yeah, for the Grand Master, it is literal programming because it's a droid, and yeah, we have the thing about, you're not a man, you're just a machine, more machine now than man, harkening back to that. Yeah. I am on the record elsewhere as not being the biggest fan of Ewoks. I'm realizing my biggest problem with that was tonal. I really love the Ewoks in this. It never felt like I was being asked to take seriously that they both are these badasses that can take out, some of the best forces that the Empire has to offer, and also, cute little teddy bears. This one doesn't really focus on the cute teddy bears. Like, I don't know, is there one or two moments maybe, but like it focuses on the fact that they're, because there's so many of them, they're really good at setting traps, and also, I gotta say, if they're gonna use if Ewoks are gonna use traps to trip an enemy, yeah, I prefer for it to be like foot soldiers, like here, rather than ATSTs, as in Return of the Jedi. I think that might more or less. I love the fact that the fights feel like classic samurai, fights. That's also, I've previously spoken on. I think a lot of the best lightsaber stuff in the movies is when it is, I suppose not only movies, but official Star Wars where it's either live action or animated. When they have it be more of like the classic samurai thing, because like, yeah, okay, in part it was like tech limitations that Lucas went for that in the original trilogy, but I do think it just feels right for Star Wars. Like, don't get me wrong, and when I'm playing one of the games, I want to be able to just go, yeah, really, really just run around and slice, fast. But in these, like, that's also something I talked about in my videos on Ahsoka, for example. And yeah, I think that is what I have there. And that is also, it feels, I think I may have said that before about Visions, because this is not the first, but, having anime lightsaber battles, I mean, Lucas has himself admitted, yeah, he was heavily inspired by Japanese, crap. Let me think. East Asian, at least. His original, the original trilogy. There's a bunch of Akira Kurosawa in there. Including the lightsaber stuff being very much like the samurai sword. And so to have, oh my, I swear I know the difference between manga and anime. Anime have that, have one of these stories just feels like a fun kind of, return to the source sort of thing. I felt similar when I read some of the comics about Matrix, because Matrix is heavily inspired by comic books. Now, among many, many other things. Anyway, I talk about that in my videos on those movies. Yeah, I think that pretty much gets us to, yeah, the we see the big ships up in the sky, and before they even start firing, we do, we have the, let's see, yeah, we have the two of them as bait, drawing out, the Grandmaster and others, and they do fire, but there's a shield. Somebody expected the Jedi Inquisition, and that is also just, I love the idea of Jedi Crusades, which also, like, by the end of the episode, for a while I was wondering where they were going to go with that, because that feels, I mean, I've heard, like, before the prequel trilogy came out, I heard, like, rumors, and I'm not ruling out maybe it's in some other media. Again, I've played a bunch of the games. I've watched everything official nearly everything official Star Wars, that's live action or animated. I guess, honestly, at this point, I guess the only things I'm really missing are the two old, the 80s animated shows, and a little bit of Young Jedi Adventures. Other than that, I've watched all of it. But I remember hearing some people talk about, maybe like the Jedi were going around killing Siths, and that's, in the prequel era, and that's why the Siths, hence the fascism. Like, it's a sort of backlash to the, it essentially, like, there was a French Revolution where the Jedi were, killing a bunch of Siths to ensure they would never hold power again, and then in response there was, essentially, the Empire, the Star Wars equivalent of Nazis, which still find it fascinating to think that there are people who didn't always realize that they were meant to be Nazis. But I talk about that in my videos on the movies. And the but yeah, by the end of the episode, they have acknowledged, it doesn't make sense to the thing about balance. I'm not gonna try to quote the entire thing, but I think Ronan says it incredibly well. and that wonderful little shot where, because he was hit in the head by one of the sabers, the he can't see color anymore. So when he tries to fetch his saber, he picks up the wrong one, and suddenly he's standing there saying, "I am a Jedi," whilst holding a red lightsaber. Who does this guy think he is? Trump? And honestly, it's hardly possible that when, I'm not even sure if Trump was the one who made that, or just, but someone posted Trump holding a red lightsaber. I don't know. I mean, some of them do pretty much come out and say, "Yep, we're the baddies." And yeah, just a wonderful. I really love when they talk about, what makes a Jedi and a Sith. What is the difference between them, and this whole thing, because that is very much what's, the major theme here. Because, like, we technically don't have a Jedi here. We have a former Sith who now hunts them, a former Sith who, was a bouncer. How that's not very Sithy. And then this machine that thinks it's a Jedi, but the programming, like, yeah, it doesn't fully understand about the balance. I think that might get us to, yeah, just really, really cool. The firing on the shield, them shooting down, some of the ships. I love that we got a POV shot for, like, the pilot, as one of as his ship is crashing. So freaking cool. The kinetic energy across, the entire, all the action scenes of this are so, there's an electricity to them, an energy that you just, I rarely see outside of anime, and I always love seeing it. I'm so glad that Star Wars is finally branching out and doing this much more, having these varied takes on it. Because I do think Star Wars, it makes sense to have people from all over the world interpret it, in different ways. And I've loved, I already mentioned, I've loved every episode of Visions so far. Now, so again, I can't say yet if this season, the rest of this season, keeps that up, but the first two seasons and this episode, absolutely love. But yeah, so the Grandmaster, gets onto the little, it's almost sort of it's not quite a catwalk, but it did remind me of Phantom Menace. And yeah, I think, yeah, at first, yeah, we think, oh, it's going to be like a straightforward rematch. And, it's like, how is she gonna be okay? She's, one of her hands is, like, in this, what's it called? Like, yeah, she looks like she's still recovering. She's still injured. And then it turns out that was a ploy. There's a bunch of lightsabers under there. It's so freaking cool. And then he manages to cut a bunch of them off, eventually just slicing off the thing that, the base of it, so that she doesn't have all these sabers. And yeah, I really appreciate, like, basically everyone gets, a wound that looks serious over the course of this episode. And two of the three are able to recover. Right. Also, the guy running the gambling hall feels like a classic Star Wars character. More energy than Jabba the Hutt. I guess closer to a Salacious Crumb in energy level. But still that same kind of, like, there's the greed, the excess, and this thing of, like, caring more about, he says, "Oh, my beautiful gambling hall." He doesn't say, "Are those people okay?" Because there were a bunch of people in there, like, before it starts moving, the gambling hall is shown to hold maybe a dozen or more people. There's a bunch of people in there. Did all of them make it out okay? And that's, Star Wars. I like when Star Wars has some edge to it like that. It's that's something I think works extremely well in the original trilogy. Um, and that I will acknowledge. Disney does not always do the have as much of an edge to their Star Wars as I would like, but here I felt like, okay, this is going in the right direction. But it's, of course, it's Disney. They're very protective of the brand that they have. Again, overall, I think they've done a pretty good job with Star Wars. It doesn't feel like they tried to just turn it into, there was already a bunch of, like sometimes I think people forget how some certain aspects of the original trilogy, there was some Disney going on there. Again, more edge in the original trilogy, but then also, I mean, there's not as much edge as I would like in the prequel trilogy. So it did, they did start to move away from that when it was Lucas before Disney. Anyway, by they, I at this point mean the people working on Star Wars across which I appreciate, changes a lot from project to project, and I'm just digging myself a bigger hole, so I'm going to move on. Let's see. What was the other thing that I really wanted to say? It was incredibly cool so it looks like she's just out of the fight, and then suddenly, like, oh, by the way, her leg is now a lightsaber. At this point, it would be quicker to list the parts of her body that don't either hold or are lightsabers. She is legally more lightsaber than person now. She's going to have to fill out some forms just to make sure. And jump, kick in the freaking forehead, lightsaber right through the head. So freaking cool. Just, yeah. And I think I also like the way that the vibe for the three of them is different, even though all three of them get badass moments, get stoic moments, but like, yeah, it really is. And this thing of Ronan facing a Jedi that he technically killed, but now it's brought back as robot, which also bringing someone back with like robotic limbs is a sign that they're going towards the dark side. So again, they're using that element of original trilogy Star Wars in this episode. And I think, what was the other thing that I really wanted to say about that? I felt like they did right by the various species, Rhodian, Ewok. I said it just a little bit ago that Wookiee, throughout, like the various ones had some traits that felt, yeah. But yeah, I really appreciate the way that the Crusade, the Grandmaster, and this whole thing, it felt like the tables had turned. It felt like, okay, you're kind of doing the thing that the Empire did, though. You still call yourself a Jedi. You fly around these big ships, attacking these places that, I mean, there might be innocent people there. How can you be sure that everyone there is, one of the bad guys? And just, yeah, finding the enemy and killing them, not trying to, that's also something I've seen some, fans forget. Like, the big thing at the end of Return of the Jedi was that he forgave. He forgave his father for what he had done and redeemed him by basically martyr. I guess let's see. Both of the Skywalkers martyr each other, don't they? They're at the end. Runs in the family, I guess. So yeah, it's very different to here have it was a reversal that I thought really worked. I have not watched anybody else's opinion on this, so I'm going to leave it at that. Yeah, just really, really solid. Great choreography for the action. For some of you, this might sound I'm sounding like a broken record. I think if you can work it in without it feeling, forced, your action story, if it's animated or live action, there's a decent chance it's gonna be more compelling if you can have at least one fight that takes place, at least partially, on a vehicle or something else that is moving very fast. And yeah, absolutely love the whole, like, honestly, the fight with the in and under the AT-AT, one of my favorite action scenes in everything Star Wars so far. So just fantastic. Yeah, I like there at the end where, I the thing about, is R5 okay? And, oh, he's been upgraded. And then there at the end, he's like carrying it on his back. And then they, oh, the truce is over, right? And they start fight, and you see their faces and it's like smiling. It's playful now, there's the energy is completely different. It's not a battle to the death. It's essentially a dance at this point. Yeah, really looking forward to more. More should be soon of this season, and I think that does cover everything that I had to say. I'm going to see if I can real quick think of something mildly amusing to close on. Let's see. I guess that might basically cover. I think they did a really good job on she has like maybe a dozen sabers there on one of her hands. That's the kind of thing that could easily just feel like overkill. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of, when Grievous had multiple sabers in the movie. If right now I actually can't recall if there was in one of the shows or shorts, but I like those better than the prequel movies. But yeah, and he didn't even have as many as she does here. But I think it worked. I think it was yeah, the fact that it didn't even mean that she could just like easily take him out, that was incredibly cool. Yeah, I like the detail that the Grandmaster, condemns. The Grandmaster is like carrying out his judgment, and Ronan uses force push to nudge her off so that she doesn't die, even though she lost the fight. And that again is this thing of like, that felt more Jedi than Sith, and he doesn't call himself a Jedi, the Ronin, and yeah, because I mean, he doesn't say it verbally, but I feel like with his actions, he is telling the Grandmaster, she is a Sith. She deserves a battle.